Thank you so much all for coming. My name is Alex Roy, and I am absolutely coming to you as an ambassador of the old world as a driving enthusiast, but an enthusiast who absolutely believes that electric cars are inevitable and a good thing, and that level 4, level 5 is inevitable and a good thing, but that anyone who tries to sell you on the notion that the future is totally binary and that we face a tipping point where cars, as we know them, are going away, is wrong, and they are trying to get you to smoke crack, and they are completely forgetting essential elements of human nature, what cars actually are, which is much more than transportation, but transformation. So here today, we have three of my favorite people who each have followed a career path which I think for almost any child in any era would be an absolute fantasy. So starting with J.R. Hildebrand, who turned down MIT, Stanford, and Harvard to become an IndyCar driver, and yet today is one of the foremost experts in automation and autonomy, and is working with the REVS program at Stanford to develop self-driving cars. Thank you for coming, J.R. We have Dan Greenawalt, who is the creative director and founder of Forza Motorsport under Microsoft Studios, which is, I think, the world's largest driving simulation game. Is that correct?
We've got a very big community of racers.
And you had 7.9 million players online in September. Is that correct?
It's a shocking number, yeah. 7.9 million in September alone.
I think that number is greater than the combined total of all sports cars sold in the world, but that's another story. And then we have Daniel Simon, you're the Chief Design Officer of RoboRace. Correct. Which is very impressive because that's the autonomous driving racing series, but much more importantly, also the author of Cosmic Motors, a book I bought years ago, which depicts the future of sports cars in the coolest possible way, and the designer of the vehicles from the movie Tron.
One of them, yes, correct.
We'll move on. So, gentlemen, I'd like to start with this picture, if you can see it, of a Jaguar E-Type, and ask each of you, if you could describe to me as simply as possible, what do you think is the message that this vehicle is sending to the driver, to a spectator?
I mean, I think it's sexy and refined.
Dan?
I think class and style. It's a beautiful design.
Daniel?
Sports cars also work without fat rockers, like tucked-in body sides, something we could go back to. But it plays on an old theme of a long dash-to-axle ratio, like long hood reflects power. In the old days, you have to fit a big combustion engine in there, things we struggle with now with the dawn of electric cars. So a lot to talk about silhouettes, actually.
What message, JR, do you think this car is sending to the driver and to people who see it?
Having a big night out in Miami, I think.
Mr. Greenawalt?
I think to one audience, this is incredible nostalgia. This is the poster on the wall. But I honestly believe to the future of automotive culture, to a younger audience, this car just looks like, what? I don't get it.
Mr. Simon?
Impracticality is attractive. If you only ask for one bullet point there.
Now, I was told by more than one automotive designer and marketer that there are only two messages when we buy anything. And message A is, do you love your family? And message B is, have more sex. And if you have enough of B, you eventually get to A. So let me ask you a question. What does this say to the passenger and to the spectator about the passenger?
About the spectator.
JR?
I don't know. I mean, I think I suppose it's yet to be defined in some way. I mean, to me, I think in our day and age right now, this to me still looks like a utility, more than an expression of self.
It seems to me like when you get into a car, even when traffic sucks, that the car you drive says something about you and what you're trying to project to the world. In Forza Motorsport, those 7.9 million players in September, they're racing cars in-game, but the cars are liveried. They actually put on their own graphics. What human need do you think they're trying to address when they're not even driving a car for real in game?
Well, I think personalization is a key part of what we do. I mean, I think that humans love to have something that expresses themselves. When we think about a generation that's grown up connected digitally, think about not just cord cutters, but Gen Z. The idea of having something that is truly theirs and unique in a digital sense is very real as this sweatshirt. And so having a car that has a livery on it like that makes the car theirs and is a reflection of themselves.
So Daniel, you're a designer, and you're obviously working on future vehicles. So there's clearly something in the human psyche that needs to be resolved, or I guess projected, in the vehicles which we own or ride in.
That's not a fact. That's your opinion right now.
Is it?
I think it's an old picture that the vehicle we drive has to reflect our personality. I think there's a shift right now. Let's say you travel to Japan. I don't see any cool kids in Shibuya having the need to express themselves through their vehicle, maybe through their scooter. That's arguable, which can be really cool. I think there's a renaissance of sneaker and footwear, how you express yourself. Just take the mobile phone. We all have one. They all look the same. There's no need to express yourself through that. It's maybe the type of apps, the type of software, the type of information that's on it. So I think there's a world where I could be happily in a world where vehicles look all the same and we have different ways of expressing ourselves. Yeah.
JR, do you think that driving, that there's an essential cathartic aspect to having control over machine, which people will be happy to give away or will fight if it's taken away from them?
I think it's interesting. Yeah, it's something that I've thought about a lot lately. This, the potential for, let's say, and even if it was just in specific environments, for our driving privileges to be removed, whether that be in order to see safety appreciably change, or in order to see the development of autonomy get to a point where safety is, we've talked about this, I think safety is the wrong rhetoric for why we should be looking forward to self-driving cars. But for me, there is an element to this relationship that we have between man and machine in our vehicles that is physical. There's a beauty to it being tactile. There's a beauty to it. We experience it in motorsport to the, at its most extreme level, that you have this very manual experience with the technology, and that's really what we draw out of it. That's why, I would sit here and rather be driving a Porsche 356 than a new GT2, because it's more visceral. There's something more sort of analog about the relationship that you have with the technology and the machine. And I think that control and the sort of freedom of choice that exists within that is something that I fear we would be more, that we won't want to just relinquish, or we won't, once we don't have it, we'll be impressed with ourselves that we let it go that easily. It's a big part, for me, it's a big part of what driving is really about, and it's where the enthusiasm in driving comes from.
So when we talk about safety, this is my opinion, I don't believe that anyone in the real world actually cares about safety at all. That's another panel next year. Dan, in Forza Motorsport, that 7.9 million player number is unbelievable, because it's greater than the sum total of everyone who goes to professional driving school, professional racing school, an SCCA event. It's monstrous. What percentage of the people playing Forza are opting to play a self-driving car in-game and have the game lap them around a track?
Well, obviously, the core of the game is not self-driving. You're very right. They're getting into entertainment, and they're seeing digital driving as a form of entertainment. I think that gets kind of the fundamental question of what you're saying. I think, talking about catharsis or not, some people see driving as entertainment in the real world, or digitally, and some see it as transportation. The safety thing seems real, though, if I'm honest. If you talk about the marketing side of care for your family or want to have sex, safety falls into the care for your family side. But yeah, I think all up, this community of racers that we have is looking for entertainment, and they are able to express themselves through their cars and then have entertainment and competition in a digital world.
It would seem to me that if anyone really cared about safety, that the cheapest way and the highest ROI way to encourage safety within months of today would be to sentence every DUI driver to playing Forza Motorsport for 90 days and before they can drive a car again, and yet that doesn't happen. Daniel, you were talking earlier about the proportions of, I don't want to use this language. The picture I wanted to use to describe what I thought to be the most attractive car ever made was considered sexist. So we had to use a Jaguar E-Type. You described the proportions of a car that is ideal. The long can you go through those proportions again?
I didn't describe it as ideal. I said like that's an engraved picture we have over a few decades now, which is really hard to counter with a short hood right now. But anyhow, let me elaborate again on the. I'm very involved in autonomy with RoboRace. I love driving myself, but I think we overlap too much the love for driving, the joy of driving, with mobility at the same time. I was 3 hours on the way here this morning. I passed thousands of customers who were persuaded by commercials to get the newest driving machine, the beautifully shaped body side, muscular rear wheels. All they do is sit in traffic with that, right? And there's a green light, they floor it maybe for 2 seconds and feel good about it. I think there's this illusion of freedom it has vanished in my eyes, at least in this area here. So I see a beautiful future where we can separate those two. There's transportation. You heavily go on a shared platform that moves you. You're not flying your own Airbus here. You sit, lean back, and enjoy a magazine or an app. But there might be a dawn of new driver experiences, like maybe more tracks get built in the future, or they're joyful roads that have much more supplies for the joyful driver. You can buy gloves down the road, I don't know, just fantasizing here. But where people today understand, boy, I haven't really been driving my car for 20 years. I've just, you don't know what drifting is. You don't know what a real lateral G-force feels like. No. Maybe there's a chance to separate it and lift the real driving experience even more up, And that also leads to new classes of vehicles. Maybe we have a chance of more lightweight, pure driving, super simple vehicles that come in, not these overly gimmicky, hyper-heavy cars that try to do everything at the same time.
So when we talk, your book, Cosmic Motors, which everyone in the audience should buy it, it's fantastic. I dreamt when I saw that book that I would own a sports car 30 to 50 years from now that would look like the designs in that book. Do you believe that it's possible to have an autonomous vehicle retain the sense of projection of personality of the occupants when the spectator knows that it's autonomous?
First of all, I think in some future it can. I believe even in materials that morph in 30 years, I think we look back at rigid body panels and body work that looks absolutely silly to us. So things can take various shapes, colors, whatever. But I don't see, and if I get in a bus, I don't feel that the bus needs to present my personality in that moment. I adopt to the mindset of being transported, and maybe it brings me to a point where then I can express myself on the track, for example. So this whole battle of making autonomous cars express something, I'm not fully sold on that.
I'm glad to hear you say that, because most of the mobility solutions that are kind of bus-like don't look like they would fit a wheelchair, which kind of defeats the purpose of mobility. Tell me, Mr. Hildebrand, I've heard you talk in the past about the SAE levels and the continuum of automation. It seems that at every level up the ladder of automation, according to SAE and DOT, that some aspect of control or agency is being taken away from the driver. If you could start from scratch and come up with a functionality or control set for the ideal enthusiast vehicle of the future, what would that look like?
I think if you think about it in the terms of the ideal enthusiast vehicle, to Daniel's point, I think that's very different from the ideal vehicle for the average person in some instance. To me, the interesting thing to think about is in the development of either of those things, what should the role of the driver be, and should that be something that's more critically sort of discussed along the way of deciding what those levels are. I know coming from the motorsports space, it's no different. I think in RoboRace or anything else, in order to develop most quickly, the driver needs to be an integral part of that loop, basically, the system of all of the pieces. We get the most out of basic driver aids like traction control, ABS, if the driver is involved in understanding what those things are, how they work, and can figure out how to get the most out of them, both in terms of helping the engineering staffs and in terms of getting the most out of them on track. A fair majority of the the high degree of automation or the automated vehicles that we see on the road today, there's nothing to keep you engaged in the process of helping that vehicle do what it's supposed to be doing best. And I think that's an interesting role to consider for a driving enthusiast going forward is, should these vehicles in their progression towards level 5 be geared towards working with drivers who are assertive and enthusiastic in the first place, rather than giving a partially autonomous vehicle to somebody who wants to just check out and wants to have nothing to do with it anyway?
Greenawalt, how many car manufacturers have called you about licensing the in-game Forza driver education system, which to me is much more effective than any training I've seen in the real world? I'm sorry to say that.
Hey.
But, I mean, why haven't manufacturers gamified driver instruction using basically just taking the system from your simulation?
Well, the relationship with manufacturers has changed dramatically over the years as the audience for gaming has shifted. And so, yes, manufacturers are now coming to us looking for technology partnerships and the like. But when you think about the problem set that we have to solve in a digital world, it's not essentially the same as what's being solved in the real world. So driver aids, for example, there has been discussion about how could we lay, Forza is known for having a line, an optimal line that tells you where to drive.
Right.
That is something we've been in discussion with manufacturers for years on. And we do have a learning AI system, the Drivatar AI system. But as I mentioned, it's solving a fundamentally different problem. In the game, our AI it has all the knowledge of God. It's omnipotent. It knows the grip. It knows the contact patch. It knows every little thing, which makes the learning AI able to learn with a different data set, and it's a very complete data set. In the real world, you have to feel your way into it. We drive in many ways with our ass. We drive with our inner ear, and that's something that we don't have to replicate in the real world. Something we were talking about just outside, which I think is an interesting point to think about. A big difference between the digital world and the real world is that in the digital world, you tend to be driving without one of your senses. It's kind of like driving without being able to hear, or driving without being able to see. You're driving without feeling when you're driving in a digital world. Well, the AI is doing the same thing. The AI has to figure out how to drive without one of the core components that we as humans have learned how to optimize for. We zone everything out. That's what makes us so good. We're not just a learning neural network. We're a neural network that can cut 99% of the noise away. Well, the AI can't yet do that.
I'm afraid we're going to have to cut our time short because we've only got 1 minute 40 seconds. We have a poll question, which I'm hoping Mr. Simon will answer. What is the poll question? This is absolutely for you, Mr. Simon. Once self-driving cars are ubiquitous, will you still feel the urge to drive?
Yeah, all the time. And this leads into a thought I also have. Autonomy doesn't mean getting rid of drivers. If I get a new Porsche, whatever, I get on a track, I can maybe download what JR would have done with that car. I can lean back, I can be in my own very vehicle with my suspension setup and see what he would do with a car and slowly learn lap by lap to maybe drive like him. This opens the door to entirely new driving experience. So instead of being feared of autonomy, it's also something that may even enhance the driver joy and fun. So yes, absolutely yes.
I'm thrilled to hear you say that because as soon as that arrives, I'm going to buy a car that you've designed that incorporates your driver aid systems with the ideal driving line on the interstate, that uses your augmented driving system so it's uncrashable, and drive it as fast as I can cross country, passing all the people who don't want to drive anymore, which looks like it's, well, we'll get to that point. Guys, we're going to run out of time.
At least maybe they'll stay out of the left lane if that's the case.
Absolutely hope everyone stays out of the left lane so I can pass them. Thank you so much for coming, all of you, Hildebrand, Greenawalt, and Mr. Simon. I look forward to seeing you here again next year.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.